fact, I think this Saturday, there's going to be another rally, No King's Rally. Millions of Americans are saying, hey, Donald Trump, you are not our king. You cannot run this country through executive orders.
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, the channel where truth is forged in fire and facts matter. If you believe in accountability, transparency, and leaders who actually answer to the people, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe right now, because today we're breaking down another heated Senate hearing that exposes just how divided Washington has become over justice, power, and the rule of law. Now, in this hearing, lawmakers are clashing over the investigation led by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, with one side calling a necessary pursuit of justice, and the other side raising serious concerns about political bias, selective enforcement, and lack of transparency. The debate centers around whether Smith should be brought before the committee to testify under oath, what evidence has been withheld, and whether federal institutions like the FBI are being weakened or politicized in the process.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, here we are once again. Once again, with the hearing espousing Republican conspiracy theories, and once again focusing on Jack Smith. How many times do we Democrats have to say, why don't we just bring Jack Smith before this committee? Why do we not put him under oath? Why don't we just ask him questions? The witnesses this morning are speculating as to what Jack Smith knew or what he told the judge, speculating about what the judge was told by Jack Smith. I mean, instead of all these speculations, why don't we just call Jack Smith? See, that has never been adequately answered in my view. I think it's time, rather than continuing to go down this rabbit hole. And really, you know, the term milking a dead cow or beating a dead horse comes to mind, because this is what this exercise is. It is milking a dead cow, which, you know, describes, I looked it up, describes a completely futile, pointless, or waste of effort that will yield no results. It implies trying to extract value, information, or result from a source that is already dead, exhausted, or incapable of providing anything further. So the further providing of information should come directly from Jack Smith. So, you know, I'm going to repeat what some of my colleagues have said. There are three things that we can focus on with the work of this committee, rather than wasting our time like this. First is call Jack Smith. Second, he has already offered to testify, so we're not going to get much resistance from him. He's already testified before the House. And he issued some reports, and we should get access to Volume 2 of Jack Smith's report. So not only should we call him to testify, but we should get our hands talking about getting information that would be good for us to have. Volume 2 of Jack Smith's report. And then thirdly, you know, there's been a focus on Kash Patel. After he received immunity, he did testify to the grand jury, and we've been trying to access that testimony. And Director Patel has stonewalled and lied to this committee, saying that he can't provide that testimony. Yes, he can. And once again, my Republican colleagues don't seem to care that he lied to this committee. So we have, as far as I'm concerned, a refusal to confront the truth. And I'm really disheartened by what is happening to an institution called the FBI, not to mention the Department of Justice, but the FBI that had, I would say, a reputation for doing the work that protected the American people. And that is not the case. What we're seeing are people being fired, not for lack of competence. In fact, they were very, very competent, not for misconduct, but because they happened to question the leader, Donald Trump. this continuous effort on the part of my Republican colleagues to just bow down to this president who does not believe that the rule of law applies to him is amazing. And you know what? The American people are getting it. And that is why millions of them, in fact, I think this Saturday, there's going to be another rally, No King's Rally. Millions of Americans are saying, hey, Donald Trump, you are not our king. You cannot run this country through executive orders. You cannot act as though the rule of law does not apply to him. And by the way, no thanks to the Supreme Court. I think their decision on his immunity was one of the worst decisions that this court, and there are many. So let me just ask one question of Mr. O'Leary. Thank you very much for testifying. In your experience, and I know there are some very fine FBI agents who either were fired or left, over 1,000. Can you go over again, the fact that all of these very, very experienced people who were engaged in white-collar crime investigations, cyber attacks, et cetera, their departure, tell us how their departure is making our country safer.
Senator, the loss of agents and analysts and professional staff across the FBI is impacting a variety of programs, from white-collar crime, protecting the integrity of our financial markets, and public corruption. Cyber, the head of the cyber division was fired, an exceptional agent that I served with for years. The head of the critical incident response group, who was the acting director in the beginning of the Trump administration, Brian Driscoll, was fired just this last August because he refused to fire one of his employees without cause as directed by Kash Patel. Brian Driscoll demonstrated the courage and the integrity that you would expect from a leader, and he refused to do so. He, in turn, was fired himself, thrown out of the FBI after years of service. He's a recipient of the Shield of Bravery and the Shield of Valor. Shield of Valor for being on a joint hostage recovery operation in Syria with the Special Operations Task Force to rescue an American citizen. These are the kind of individuals who are losing, and those who are not being fired.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary, for standing up for an institution that deserves our support. And instead, we have a director who parties around, who flies around in a plane, who visits his girlfriend. Give me a break.
And as I watched this hearing, one thing became very clear. This is no longer just about one investigation. This is about whether Americans can still trust the system to be fair. Right out of the gate, you hear the frustration. One senator openly dismisses the hearing as a waste of time, calling it pointless and accusing others of pushing conspiracy theories. But then, in the same breath, demands that Jack Smith be brought in to testify under oath, arguing that instead of speculation, the committee should go straight to the source. Now let's pause right there, because this is where things start to contradict themselves. On one hand, the hearing is being dismissed as meaningless. On the other hand, there's an urgent call to bring in the very person at the center of the controversy. Which is it? Is this serious enough to demand sworn testimony? Or is it just political theater? You can't have it both ways. And this is what frustrates a lot of Americans watching from the outside. There's a lot of talking, a lot of accusations, but not enough direct answers. Now I actually agree on one point here. If there are serious allegations, then yes, bring Jack Smith in. Put him under oath. Let the American people hear directly from him. That's not controversial. That's basic accountability. But here's where I part ways with what we're hearing in this clip. There's this narrative being pushed that everything is already settled, that this is just a dead issue, that continuing to question it is pointless. But if that's true, then transparency should only strengthen that position, not weaken it. If everything is above board, then there should be nothing to hide, nothing to avoid, nothing to delay. Instead, what we're seeing is a system where questions are being deflected rather than answered. Then the conversation shifts to something even more serious, the state of the FBI. And this is where it really hits. We're told that experienced agents, people who spent years working on major cases like cyber threats and financial crimes, are leaving or being pushed out. Not because they're incompetent, Not because they broke the law, but because of internal decisions and leadership conflicts. Think about that. You've got individuals who risked their lives, who built careers protecting the country, being removed or walking away. And we're supposed to believe that has no impact on national security? Come on. When you lose experienced personnel in any organization, especially one as critical as the FBI, you don't just replace that overnight. You lose institutional knowledge. You lose leadership. You lose stability. And then we're told the country is somehow safer. That doesn't add up. Now, to be fair, the argument being made is that these changes are necessary, that they're part of a broader effort to reshape the agency. But the question is, reshape it into what? Because if the perception becomes that the FBI is no longer neutral, that it's influenced by politics rather than guided by law, then the damage goes far beyond staffing. It hits trust. And once trust is gone, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. Another thing that stood out to me is the rhetoric around power. There's this repeated claim that certain political figures act as though the law doesn't apply to them. That's a serious accusation. But here's the thing. That standard has to go both ways. You can't demand accountability for one side while ignoring concerns raised about the other. Justice doesn't work like that. It has to be consistent. It has to be equal. Otherwise, it stops being justice and starts becoming something else entirely. And that's what a lot of Americans are worried about right now. They're not just asking who's right or who's wrong in this specific case. They're asking whether the system itself is still reliable, whether the same rules apply to everyone, whether truth is being pursued or shaped. Because when hearings turn into back-and-forth political battles instead of fact-finding missions, it becomes harder and harder for the public to separate reality from narrative. And that's dangerous. At the end of the day, this hearing highlights a bigger problem. Not just disagreements over one investigation, but a deeper divide over how justice should be handled in this country. One side is saying trust the process. The other side is saying question everything. And maybe the real answer lies somewhere in between. Trust but verify. Demand answers but base them on facts. Hold leaders accountable, but do it consistently, not selectively. Because if we lose that balance, we don't just lose faith in one case or one agency. We lose faith in the entire system. And that's something we can't afford. If you want more breakdowns like this, real analysis without the spin, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Freedom Forge, and stay tuned. Because we're going to keep digging into these issues, keep asking the tough questions, and keep bringing you the perspective that others won't.